Do they remember that they came fourth after quite a heavy last few questions at the top, battling for those top three spaces? Or do they actually remember the content from the lesson, which is actually the purpose of what this I suppose, summative end of lesson tool is for?
Or are they just clicking, hoping to get points for being the fastest?
Hello, welcome to So What? I'm Andy Perrier.
And I'm Matt Lovegrove.
Matt, how are you? Nice to see you.
Good, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. This episode, we're going to talk about gamification. We're going to talk about the idea of, does more points build more engagement? But Matt, why are we talking about this?
So you were at Bet this year, right, with me. And Kahoot, the quiz, online quiz kind of platform, had one of the biggest stands I think I've ever seen.
Enormous.
It was gigantic. Clearly some significant investment is going into Kahoot, and it was buzzing around there. And there were people demoing their tools, and they were giving out free merch, and there was someone running around with Kahoot socks on their ears and all that kind of stuff. And I bumped into a teacher, ex-colleague of mine, and we kind of looked at this hype, and we were talking about, is this really making a difference now? That gamification of learning, is it really doing what it should do? So the question we want to discuss today is, Kahoot, so what?
So what? Matt, I put it to you. When was the last time you saw a student quite so excited by a games points quiz?
Well, they do enjoy it, right? Children do enjoy, particularly younger children, I think, possibly, I would say. I've done some of these kind of online quizzes with students when I've been in schools, and they do enjoy the competitive element of it and knowing that they're getting it right. And I think it does have a place, but I guess the question is, how are we balancing that against, is it really making a difference? What is it we're assessing? Is it just fun for the sake of fun?
As I put it to any of the students, the competitiveness, does that sometimes overshadow what it is that the students are themselves being tested on and showcasing their learning? Do they remember that they came fourth after quite a heavy last few questions at the top, battling for those top three spaces? Or do they actually remember the content from the lesson, which is actually the purpose of what this I suppose, summative end of lesson tool is for?
Or are they just clicking, hoping to get points for being the fastest?
Yeah, absolutely. They're preparing all four fingers for each of the spots, and they're just trying to get the fastest time possible, kind of win, lose, death, or glory.
And why wouldn't they? They want to be on the podium at the end, right? That's what Kahoot do. In quizzes, those kind of tools, they give you a little podium at the end, and if you're on the top one, you feel really good about yourself.
Because competitiveness within education has been around since education started. And tech companies have obviously tapped into the competitive element of learning. And I suppose around the world, internationally, competition is seen in many different ways. But the idea of wanting to win and wanting to be first and wanting to please and wanting to kind of do all those things means that companies like Kahoot presume to have an absolute winner on their hands.
And I guess for some students, that's quite motivating. For me as a student, if I was in that classroom, it wouldn't be overly motivating. I'm not that interested in competition like that. I wouldn't necessarily want my name to be on the podium. I'm quite happy kind of just sitting there doing my thing, hopefully getting it right. So for some students, quite possibly. What about those that aren't competitive though?
So interestingly, I'm the exact opposite. I really like to be on that leaderboard.
Do you?
I like to be quickest. So I think we do have a little problem on our hands with us two. Not for me, because I'm going to win, but I wonder for those students that aren't competitive, how do we make sure that they are included in a form of formative assessment? Because you can imagine there is a child of decent ability who comes quite far down the leaderboard because they want a chance to actually think about the question. They want to reflect deeply. They want to consider the options, and then they want to give their correct answer. But their correct answer is slower than the jockeys at the front racing for that prize. And so her reflection of herself or himself is that they're not very good because they're all the way down the leaderboard. And is that the sort of environment, is that the sort of culture we want to engender in the classroom when it comes to our maybe quieter, middling children?
And it makes me think as well, if you're a child in that classroom who struggles to read, maybe, or isn't as quick as reading as others, how does that feel for you? If you are towards the bottom of the leaderboard, but you've got a lot of questions right, just because people can read faster and can click faster than you.
Absolutely. And I think if technology is going to do something towards promoting inclusive education and accessible education, is Kahoot actually the opposite way around, in that we promote the fastest, the meritocracy of our student body all the way to the top, even though those that didn't have a chance to access it in quite the same way aren't given that chance? And is that completely fair?
So here's my question to you then. How can we slow this down and encourage more thoughtful responses rather than the speed?
A wonderful question. I reckon it lives in collaboration. So rather than getting students to answer by themselves, there's a couple of things they could do. They could do a kind of a classic, like a think, pair, share. So it's not based on time. We can get rid of the timer. Um, we can get the students to talk to each other about the answer first and then put the result in. So if the result is the correct one, brilliant, they get the points. But the fact that they've talked about it and they've got that deeper thinking about the answer means that hopefully their memory and engagement within the questions is greater. Their longer term memory will accept it in their memory locker for a bit longer, but also just a chance to socialize the idea of quizzing rather than it being it's a collaborative competitiveness much more than a singularity, and also it will include those that need that time to think and to process and discuss. But you can still have that competition for getting the answer right. So that's probably one area that might work. Another area is from the teacher's point of view. After every single question has been answered, the the feature of Kahoot is that it automatically goes to the next question. Ready? 5 seconds, let's go. And it just keeps that energy up. Sometimes you want to discuss the answer. So if they've thought about it and discussed it within their collaborative teams, and then a chance to share with the wider student body, led and modelled by the teacher, to dispel any misconceptions from students that might have got it wrong. That's a much more powerful gift to be able to lock down that deeper learning than it is just to race. And if you get it wrong, you haven't had the chance to reflect on why you got it wrong, just that you got it wrong.
So you could actually flip that too, couldn't you? And say to a student who got it right, can you explain why? Why did you pick that answer? Or if your students are brave enough, you could choose someone that got it wrong and ask them to explain their thinking behind that. And that opens a really interesting discussion about why and picking up on misconceptions. I think one of the issues as well is going through it at pace, is that this idea of adaptive teaching. So if you're doing a quiz and you're realizing that 50% of your students have got that question wrong, is it okay to stop at that point and address that misconception for longer than maybe a minute or two, so you can really get to the bottom of that before you move on? I feel like teachers want to get through that really quickly. It's probably got something to do with the classic, or this is a lesson starter or a lesson plenary kind of thing. But actually, wouldn't great adaptive teaching be, 50% of us have got this wrong. So actually, let's stop at the moment and let's work out why, and let's go back through this, or let's do this activity, or can you guys that got it right help those students that got it wrong? What about that type of teaching and amongst this?
I think that's the dichotomy of something like Kahoot, where it relies on speed and excitement
Speed,
and
isn't it?
engagement.
Yeah.
As soon as the teacher goes, "Come on, guys, we'll put a stop to that. Let's talk about this question." Not all of my old teachers sounded like that. Yeah, I would argue that the peaks and troughs of the levels of excitement and engagement, if you stop start, I don't see the purpose of having something like Kahoot as a formative quiz engine. If we cast our minds back, I mean, something like Kahoot is only, 12, 13 years old? It really hasn't been on the market a very long time. But it seems to be Kahoot is almost the verb by which people talk about
Yeah.
speed quizzing.
Yeah.
Oh, fetch the Hoover. I need to clear up this dust. I need to Google. Come on, guys, let's do a Kahoot.
So just touching on a few things you said before then, why are we even using it then? So if you could get as good results with hands up, here's a question for you. Multiple choice answers on the board. Put your hands up if you think it's A, B, C, or D, and you get the same feel for the room. What's the point of it all then?
I mean, that is the ultimate crux of our podcast, isn't it? So what? I mean, there are loads of non-computery, I haven't used the term computery for a while. Non-computery, I'm going to stick with it. Tools like Plickers, the old QR code thing that you twist around for A, B, C, or D. Uh, like you say, yes, everyone mostly have got them. Put your hand up if you think you know the answer.
I used to use the whiteboards. I used to, like the mini whiteboards that students had, and they'd each have one, and I'd ask a question and get them to write their answer on it and hold it up. And you'd like scan the room and you'd get a good feel quickly as to whether students had got the right answer or not generally.
Some lovely adaptive teaching going on there.
Yeah. I guess the one thing that didn't give me is the data at the end, which is really useful, right? So when I used to use Kahoot when I was a teacher, I'd often do it at the end of a lesson to assess students' knowledge. I'd build it in advance. I'd know what I wanted to teach, what I wanted to achieve. I'd build a lesson. It used to take me ages. This was kind of pre-AI, and we can do that quicker. But I used to do it at the end and say, right, 75% of the students have got that knowledge, so this is what I need to go through the next lesson. And then I'd often repeat that Kahoot at the end of the next lesson, see if we'd got up to 100%. So that's where it's useful. So I think in terms of the data and the being able to track misconceptions and changes over time, it is. But if we're wanting to slow things down and have a discussion and be really adaptive, is there a place for us not to use Kahoot at all?
Yeah, I mean, and it's at this point that we should say that we love Kahoot.
Oh, yeah.
And we've always loved Kahoot. But our question in this podcast is to challenge and to work out actually where do these tools have a place? And they do have a place. The question about data is really important because unless teachers are looking at the results of these quizzes, what is the point in doing them? Just to get 3 students on a leaderboard at the end of the lesson means
What does that
absolutely
mean?
nothing if it's not about looking at the lesson and working out, well, what do I need to do for tomorrow's lesson? How am I going to separate my children? Who am I going to carpet? How am I going to let them peel off as we kind of unravel the questions that have come before us? I mean, other products are available. I'm thinking of something as simple as Socrative, the exit tickets.
Yeah.
And it's literally like, to what extent did you understand the lesson, and answer the one question on the board?
Nice.
And a lot of the times, that was so fixed in the template, and as the teacher was going, right, Socrative, boom, they were then writing the question on the board. And if the teachers are clever, their kind of question that they've put should tell them everything they need to know about whether the students have picked it up or not. You don't need 10 questions
No.
when one will do. So I think there are some ways in which we can either think about stripping back how many questions we ask, or actually, as part of adaptive teaching, can AI help us in the middle of a lesson, towards the end of a lesson, just build something based on what we've done, based on what the students have said, and be in the moment when it comes to asking questions and gathering feedback about student knowledge.
This is where I think AI has got the potential to completely change this. If teachers are confident enough to walk around the room and think, I'm not sure now, have my students really got these key concepts? And if they can build a quiz in 30 seconds, a minute, to give to their students there and then, that's incredibly powerful. I wish that was available before I left teaching. It wasn't. I used to spend, like I said, half an hour building a Kahoot deck. But that idea now of just being able to very quickly generate questions for students they can answer there and then, because you're concerned about knowledge or you're concerned about misconceptions, if your teachers can do that on the fly, that's very, very powerful as an exit activity.
There is a real challenge, and I believe this fervently, that multiple choice questions, if done badly, are an absolute waste of space, because the problem with multiple choice questions are you've got to think of 3 other answers that could be the answer but aren't the answer. And that's a real problem. So not only do you have to think of the question and the answer, you have to then think of all the alternatives that it could be.
Yeah.
So you end up taking such a long time. AI is really good at coming up with those multiple choice questions that absolutely could be the right answer. So if you're looking to try and trip up the children through misconceptions, AI-generated MCQs are the way forward to go in terms of that time saved. Obviously, open-ended questions on exit tickets are really useful as well, but sometimes what you just need is a series of red and green dots, times by 30, to see who's got it and who doesn't, to have the longer form answer. And you've got to read through all 30 of those and then remember, like, okay, well, you kind of got it, you don't have it. That's where this really comes into play.
Yeah.
Instant data for instant action is really important. If you're able to change and adapt the lesson based on the instant data you've got, then you are a reflective teacher and you are meeting the needs of the learners in your care, rather than let's get to question 12 because I've built the quiz.
Yeah.
And that's not helping anyone.
I completely agree, and I've used quizzes recently, the AI quiz tool, to generate quizzes quickly, and the detractors in there have been really impressive. It used to actually, funny memory, I used to struggle so much with this. I'd often do a multiple choice answer that wasn't at all relevant or was something silly, and that's because actually creating those detractors is tricky, right? But AI does have a place in that, and yeah, like I said, I think if you're confident enough to walk around and think, I really want to know what's happening in my classroom, I really want to see those red dots, I want to see where those misconceptions are, and you can do that on the fly, why wouldn't you?
So if we think again about our PICRAT scale, so students' relationships with technology are either passive, interactive, or creative, and Kahoot is definitely in the interactive space. They're not letting things absorb through them. I mean, there must be ways in which we can, even through something like an experience with a Kahoot, how can we move from interactive to creative when it comes to quizzes?
That's a great question, actually. I think one of the nice things that you can explore with students to do that is have them create their own questions and their own multiple choice answers with their own detractors. That's actually a real skill to be able to do that. So if you're interested in increasing your creativity, is having your students generate the questions themselves. It's a really good test of their own knowledge, actually.
The detractors that they put in will absolutely demonstrate whether their misconceptions are like valid or invalid. The way they ask the questions as well will let you know whether they understand what it is that they're asking as well. So we're getting to that high level thinking, that deep thinking, that through the PICRAT scale, we're able to move from interactive to creative whilst getting students to demonstrate at a much deeper level their understanding with regards to the content.
Yeah, so I've done this before with students where they've like built their own Kahoots.
But my provocation is, if everyone's built a Kahoot, how do you manage?
So you create a quiz for a partner, and your partner takes that quiz to see how many questions they get right.
Okay, and then also that's a good understanding of whether the partner can understand what's being asked, what the detractors are, because then they can talk about their quiz afterwards, about the things they understood, the things they didn't, even about the question setting. And that peer feedback can be really powerful when you're both working towards the same objective, and you've got yours that you've modeled, and you're working with someone else's as well. Yes, I think that has the kind of the hallmark of a decent formative session.
Nice. And I've got another question for you, actually. When you were a teacher and you used to build Kahoots, would you lead it at the front, or would you allow? I've noticed recently tools like quizzes, for instance, have got a self-paced mode where the students see the question and the answers on their device, and they kind of work it at their own pace, which could solve the issue of fastest finger first and time and things like that. To do that and having it teacher led. So typically, I would always lead mine. I would always read the question, students would answer. What's the benefit of not doing that and allowing students to do it at their own pace?
Yeah, I was the teacher at the front,
Yeah.
and I led from the front.
The showman.
I was the sage on the stage.
Yeah.
Is that the thing?
Yeah, it's like the quiz show host, the Chris Tarrant of the classroom.
Any excuse to get out my golden jacket. I jumped at it.
Everyone look at me.
Everyone
Eyes
look
on
at me. I'm the teacher, everyone. And boy, I led from the front.
Yeah.
And I think now that we have the opportunity to reflect much more on the tools that we use, and teachers should give themselves this breathing space to think, okay, fine, we're using Kahoot. I mean, another example is something like Times Table of Rockstars, which absolutely demands the fastest, and there are global leaderboards dedicated to who is the fastest at doing times tables.
Have you seen those kids on like YouTube where they are just? I mean, I don't even look at I can't even read the question before they've got the answer. Have you seen them just tapping away at the answers like almost like mini robots? It's insane.
It's like the old dancing arrows at
it is. Yeah, or it's
arcades.
like the old Tetris players where I just realized what the block was, and they'd already got it in the space, and the line had gone.
So I have a first-hand account of. I was very, very proud of myself and very, very smug, because I saw a child do this in action. So I saw a child just finger tapping as quickly as they could, and they
Yeah.
got 100%,
Yeah,
and
it's
it was
nuts.
amazing.
Nuts.
And I leaned and went, "That's amazing. What's 8 times 7?" And they froze.
Really?
Yeah, year 4
No.
kid, year 5 kid.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I promise you. And I knew 8 times 7 is always the killer. It's the only times table. People are like, "Oh my God, is it 54, 56? Oh my God." And he couldn't tell me.
Really?
Yeah, and he was
How come?
so because they hadn't translated the act of what a times table was to the rote act of that number multiplied by that number is this number, like on the screen, and that's all they're doing. They're not then putting it into real
I
life
see.
and going, okay, what is 8 times 7? They didn't have time to verbalize it when they were
Right.
tapping away for seconds
So
before they
if
got
they
to
were in a
stomach.
completely different context, like they're going shopping and they brought 8 lots of 7 something, they wouldn't know how much they were going to have to spend, right? That's really interesting.
I just thought I would offer that misconception and just ask and just go, what's 8 times 7?
Yeah.
And they stared at me and they went, I just thought, my God, like never has a theory that I've thought of actually come true. But it really goes to show the idea of, yes, times table rock stars, brilliant. Are we then bringing it back into the real world? Are we contextualizing it? Are we adding multi-step problems to it? Are we making it real for the students? Because students tapping as quickly as they can to get on a leaderboard.
What does that really mean? Yeah.
What does it mean?
Yeah. That's really interesting. I have seen, I can't remember what platform it was before, but there's a class-based, you get those different modes where you can do self-paced. There's a mode where if you do really well, you can freeze other players and drop other players down the leaderboard and things like that. And you can like storm yourself up. But I'm sure there's a mode that allows you to like power up, or like Mario Kart, where you can like throw a shell at someone else. It allows you to do that during the quiz and it knocks them down the leaderboard. What do you think of stuff like that within this context?
Can you imagine? Right, I'm going to take technology away, and you're in an English lesson and you're writing a lovely bit of prose, and the teacher goes, "Oh, that's a lovely adverb." Stand up and rip a page out of another kid's book
exactly,
and throw it in the bin.
Yeah.
That would never happen.
Well, that happened when I was in school. That was my early say. We had teachers that would say stuff like that.
Well, they'd rip up your pages if you didn't include nice
I remember
adverbs.
I got in loads of trouble once because I hadn't done my column addition in columns, and she tore out a page out of my book and asked me to redo it all.
It's very funny at the end of term when you've got this really skinny little book with like two paper clips holding it together, and
Can you imagine doing that now though? Ripping out that page, it's not good enough.
Gone are the days that you can't throw the chalk dusters anymore at people's faces.
But you're right though, actually, to think about it like that. If we put ourselves in the shoes of a child who's trying their best, they might struggle to read, but someone's doing so well that they are throwing those figurative shells at them through Mario Kart. That must be awful, actually.
It's not great for the old self-esteem.
It's not, is it? It's fun though, but
it's fun if you're at the top.
It's fun if you're at the top.
So it's not a very inclusive practice, I would argue.
No.
And I wonder whether it is just so important that the ones at the top don't need to know they're at the top really, because they're doing well. Like what's this game for? It's not for those at the top to pat themselves on the back and go, "Yeah, I'm bloody good at this."
Yeah.
Actually, do we need to make sure that all children are able to access being able to showcase what they've learned in that lesson?
Thinking back to when I was in the classroom, I reckon 85% of the time I'd have the same students at the top. These were I'm talking about when I taught secondary as well. You'd typically get those students that would go home and actually do their homework properly and would really study, and they'd come in and it was always the same cluster of students at the top, but always the same in the middle. And how does that feel actually if you're that student?
Would you like to know? I won't name the school I went to, but the school I went to as a teenager, their examination policy was there were 25 boys in a class. In every exam, the boy with the top score got the A star.
Yeah.
Then the next 5 boys got an A.
Wow.
The next 5 got a B. Next 5 got a C, and the last 4 got a D.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting 89% in my science. I got a D.
Really? Just because you were in that
because
that
all the other boys did better than I did,
even though you got a really good score.
I got a really good score. And reading back my darling mama decided that she wanted space in the attic, so she gave me back all my old school reports, and I read them all back, and all of them said, "Well, Andy's a nice boy, but he's not very clever."
Oh,
And I was just like, "That's not cool, man."
no,
Like, I thought I was pretty clever, but it's just all the other boys were much cleverer.
interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so I am that child. I would be that child in Kahoot, as who in that school, in that setting, I would never come first.
When I was in year 8, year 9, you know what it's like at the beginning of a school year? You think, right, I'm going to actually do my work properly. I've got brand new books. I'm going to make them look nice, all that kind of stuff. That's how I was
The
anyway.
promises you make to yourself.
And I wasn't the best behaved in school. And I think it was year 9. And I was sitting in a science lesson, and the science teacher said, right, we've got homework to do. And I thought, I'm actually going to go and do this. Right. This is typically the first week of the school. I'd be like, I'm going to do this properly. And I went home and answered it as best I could. And it came back with red crosses on it, almost all of it. And I remember very clearly, even a 12, 13-year-old thinking, I'm rubbish at this. I'm not even going to try now. And for the rest of that year in that class, I did not try. So I just thought, I'm obviously not bright enough.
No, it sticks with you. So to bring it back then, the idea of, low stakes quizzing, but high stakes inclusivity, if that could be a way to phrase it, we have to think about what is it that we want to know from our students so that we may plan the next lesson.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. We can't default to the verb that is, let's Kahoot. We have to think about what is going to give the teacher the best way to be reflective and adaptive in their next lesson in order that the students may succeed evermore.
And we say, let's quizzes though.
Is there a new sheriff in town? This
Did
town ain't
you
big
see
enough for the both of us.
It was really interesting. I bet you got Kahoot had a huge stand, and quizzes had a fairly big stand, but it was much smaller. It was kind of in the corner, and they could see each other across. It was like the Wild West. But for students that didn't do very well in Kahoot, take Kahoot aside for one moment. I used to love the idea of doing targeted questions for students who I knew wouldn't or would struggle to contribute or were worried about getting things wrong. So, you get those students that lack confidence. I'm thinking about a boy in particular called Sam, and I would always ask him a question that I knew he would get the answer to. I knew he'd know it, so that he felt good about himself. Right?
Aren't you nice?
Isn't that what teachers do, though? It's in amongst it all. He used to really struggle, and every now and then I'd say, right, Sam, I'm going to ask you this question. I knew he'd know the answer because I just wanted to make him feel good. And he really, really struggled in school. School was a challenge for him for many reasons. And it's just that this whole conversation's made me reflect. When I did things like Kahoot with him, he was never on the podium, ever. And how would that feel if that was you?
Every time.
If that was you every year.
And then every teacher's like, let's do a Kahoot. You're like, oh, God.
At the end of every lesson, if every teacher saying, let's do a Kahoot, and you weren't even third on the podium, I wonder what that does for your confidence as a young person. I can't remember. Does Kahoot give you, I think you can't see the public list, but as a teacher, you can export the data, can't you, and see who's at the bottom, but I'm glad he didn't see that. But should I have given him the chance to have been, should I have adapted my quizzes so that there were times where he got everything right?
I actually think you're asking it the wrong way around.
Wrong.
Should you be putting children in that situation where you would have to manipulate how you do something?
Exactly.
Or could you just create something that is just inclusive by nature?
Yeah.
So, Matt, what's your key takeaway from this podcast?
I think actually removing the timer from a online quiz like a Kahoot could be game changing in the classroom because it allows your children to think and not worry about speed, particularly if we're passionate about inclusivity in the classroom. I think that's a game changer for me.
Really good. I think because I'm just a slave now to the Pick-Rat matrix, Kimmons 2020. I think to get that higher level thinking, to get that deeper thinking, can the children create their own quiz? That will give you so much information in terms of misconceptions and what they know. Hopefully that will help the teacher adapt their teaching for the next lesson, which is what the whole point of formative assessment is.
Love it. Great.
Amazing.
So the so what of Kahoot debunked.
So, Matt, we'll leave it there. So, are you now ready to reflect on whether gamification can really make a difference in the classroom?
I am. It's been a fascinating discussion. I have more questions, no pun intended, than answers.
I didn't see what you did there, but I like it. See you next time.
Take care.